In the pursuit of truth, clarity is essential. We have stripped away the narrative to show you unfiltered, unedited reality. Witness raw, compelling footage from the front lines of justice, allowing the actual events to speak entirely for themselves.
Sir, step away from the door.
This is my mom's home. I have ID.
Turn around.
Please, just call her.
Marcus, the mail matches his name.
I'm telling you the truth.
Hands behind your back.
The body camera footage starts rolling at exactly 2:47 inches the afternoon on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday. Officer Marcus Thompson adjusts his uniform as he walks up the concrete steps of a modest two-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood. What he doesn't know is that he's about to make the kind of mistake that will haunt him for the rest of his career. A mistake so catastrophic that it will cost him his badge, his reputation, and his future. But most importantly, a mistake that will expose just how dangerous assumptions can be when they collide with reality. The call came in around 2:30 that afternoon. A neighbor had reported suspicious activity at 1247 Maple Street. According to the caller, a black male had been seen entering and leaving the property multiple times over the past few days, and she was concerned he might be breaking in. The caller mentioned that the homeowner, an elderly white woman named Dorothy Richardson, lived alone and had been in the hospital for the past week, recovering from surgery. Officer Thompson, a 7-year veteran of the force, took the call without hesitation. At 34 years old, he considered himself experienced enough to handle any situation. He had responded to hundreds of burglary calls, trespassing complaints, and welfare checks throughout his career. This seemed like a straightforward case. Get to the house, investigate the situation, and if necessary, make an arrest. What Thompson didn't do was run a proper background check on the property. He didn't verify the caller's information. He didn't check recent police reports from the area. Most critically, he didn't bother to confirm who actually lived at that address or who might have legitimate access to the home. These oversights would prove to be his downfall. As Thompson approached the front door, he noticed a late-model sedan parked in the driveway. The car was clean, well-maintained, and had no obvious signs of being stolen or abandoned. A reasonable officer might have taken this as a sign that whoever was inside had every right to be there. But Thompson had already made up his mind about what he expected to find. He knocked on the door firmly, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his service weapon. After about 30 seconds, the door opened to reveal a tall, well-dressed black man in his early 40s. The man wore khakis, a button-down shirt, and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked tired but not particularly surprised to see a police officer at the door. The man's name was David Richardson, and he was Dorothy's son. He had driven in from out of state 3 days earlier to take care of his mother's house while she recovered from her hip replacement surgery. He had been watering her plants, collecting her mail, and making sure everything was secure. He had every right to be there. In fact, his mother had specifically asked him to stay at the house to keep an eye on things. But Officer Thompson didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't introduce himself properly or inquire about the man's relationship to the property. Instead, he immediately demanded to see identification and asked what the man was doing in the house. His tone was aggressive from the start, as if he had already determined that a crime was being committed. David remained calm and polite. He explained that Dorothy Richardson was his mother and that he was taking care of the house while she was in the hospital. He offered to show Thompson his identification and even suggested they could call his mother at the hospital to verify his story. These were the actions of an innocent man with nothing to hide. Thompson barely glanced at the ID when David handed it over. He didn't notice that David's last name was Richardson, the same as the homeowner. He didn't pay attention to the address on the driver's license, which listed this very house as David's childhood home. He was so convinced that he had caught a burglar in the act that he ignored every piece of evidence that contradicted his assumptions. Instead of taking a moment to verify David's story, Thompson made his second critical mistake. He told David to step outside so they could talk further. David complied, stepping onto the front porch with his hands visible. Thompson then informed him that he was being detained for investigation of burglary and trespassing. David's demeanor shifted from cooperative to concerned. He again explained that this was his childhood home and his mother's current residence. He He offered to provide phone numbers for family members who could vouch for him. He suggested they call the hospital where his mother was recovering. He even offered to show Thompson family photos inside the house that would prove his connection to the property. Thompson ignored all of these reasonable requests. Instead, he radioed for backup and informed dispatch that he had detained a suspect in a possible burglary case. He didn't mention that the suspect claimed to be the homeowner's son. He didn't relay any of the explanations David had provided. He simply reported that he had found a black male inside a house that was supposed to be empty. The backup arrived within minutes. Officer Sarah Martinez pulled up just as Thompson was placing David in handcuffs. Martinez, a newer officer with only 2 years on the force, approached the scene, expecting to assist with a routine arrest. She had no reason to question Thompson's judgment or actions, but Martinez noticed something that Thompson had missed. As she walked up to the house, she saw that the mail in the mailbox was addressed to both Dorothy Richardson and David Richardson. She also noticed that the key David had used to open the door was still sitting on a small table near the entrance, along with what appeared to be family photographs. Martinez quietly mentioned these observations to Thompson, but he dismissed her concerns. He was committed to his course of action and didn't want to appear uncertain in front of a junior officer. This was his third mistake, and perhaps the most damaging one of all. Pride and stubbornness were about to turn a simple misunderstanding into a career-ending disaster. Meanwhile, David remained handcuffed on the front porch, watching as neighbors began to gather and stare. He could see the confusion and concern on their faces. Some of these people had known him since he was a child. They had watched him grow up in this very house, but now they were seeing him treated like a criminal by the police. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, approached Officer Martinez and tried to explain that David was Dorothy's son. She had seen him coming and going for the past few days and knew he was there to help his mother. Martinez listened to this information and again tried to share it with Thompson, but he was too focused on processing the arrest to pay attention. Thompson called for a transport vehicle to take David to the station for booking. He filled out his preliminary report, describing the incident as a clear case of breaking and entering. He noted that the suspect had been found inside the residence and had offered various excuses for his presence. He failed to mention that the suspect's identification showed the same last name as the homeowner, or that multiple witnesses had vouched for his legitimacy. As they waited for transport, David made one final attempt to resolve the situation peacefully. He asked Thompson to simply call the number for his mother's hospital room. He explained that she was alert and coherent and could clear everything up in less than 5 minutes. This request should have been the easiest thing in the world for Thompson to accommodate. One phone call would have prevented everything that was about to happen, but Thompson refused. He said the investigation would be handled properly at the station and that David would have plenty of opportunities to tell his story to detectives. This decision would prove to be the final nail in the coffin of Thompson's career. The transport van arrived at 3:15, and David was loaded into the back seat for the short ride to the police station. During that 15-minute journey, something remarkable was happening back at 1247 Maple Street. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had tried to speak up earlier, was not content to let this injustice continue. She had Dorothy Richardson's cell phone number and decided to take matters into her own hands. Dorothy answered on the second ring, her voice groggy from pain medication but alert enough to understand what Mrs. Patterson was telling her. Her son had been arrested at her own house by police who refused to verify his identity. Dorothy's reaction was immediate and explosive. She demanded to speak to whoever was in charge and insisted that Mrs. Patterson drive her directly from the hospital to the police station. Meanwhile, at the station, David was being processed through booking. His fingerprints were taken, his belongings were cataloged, and he was photographed from multiple angles. The desk sergeant, a veteran named Frank Kowalski, noticed something odd about the arrest report. The suspect's driver's license showed the same address where he had allegedly been trespassing. Kowalski had seen enough real burglars to know they didn't typically carry identification linking them to their crime scenes. Kowalski asked Thompson to clarify this detail, but Thompson insisted everything was by the book. He said the suspect was obviously using fake identification, or had somehow obtained the homeowner's personal information. These explanations made no sense to Kowalski, but Thompson was the arresting officer and had primary responsibility for the case. David was placed in a holding cell while Thompson began preparing his formal report. This was when the real investigation should have started, but Thompson was more focused on justifying his actions than uncovering the truth. He wrote up the incident as a clear-cut burglary case, describing David as evasive and uncooperative despite video evidence showing exactly the opposite. At 3:45, the phone in the detective bureau started ringing. Dorothy Richardson was calling from her hospital bed, demanding to speak to someone about her son's arrest. The call was transferred to Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who listened in growing amazement as Dorothy explained that David was her son and had been staying at the house with her full permission and knowledge. Rodriguez immediately pulled up the arrest report and saw the red flags that everyone else had missed or ignored. The matching last names, the address on the driver's license, the lack of any actual evidence of criminal activity. She walked down to the holding area to speak with David personally. What she found was a well-educated, articulate man who calmly explained his situation for what felt like the 100th time that day. David showed Rodriguez photos on his phone of himself and his mother at family gatherings in that very house. He provided contact information for relatives, family, friends, and even his mother's doctor who could verify his identity and relationship to the property. Rodriguez realized immediately that a massive mistake had been made. She contacted Thompson and asked him to come to her office to discuss the case. When Thompson arrived, she laid out all the evidence that proved David's innocence. The matching names, the family photos, the neighbor testimonies, and most damning of all, the phone call from Dorothy Richardson herself. Thompson's response revealed the depth of his stubbornness and poor judgment. Instead of admitting his mistake, he doubled down. He suggested that David might be running some kind of elaborate con game. He theorized that David had somehow manipulated an elderly woman into believing he was her son. He even proposed that the family photos could have been digitally altered. These conspiracy theories were so far-fetched that Rodriguez questioned whether Thompson was psychologically fit for duty. She documented his statements carefully, knowing they would become crucial evidence in the internal investigation that was surely coming. At 4:20, Dorothy Richardson arrived at the police station in a wheelchair, having checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice. She was accompanied by Mrs. Patterson and two other neighbors who had known David since childhood. Dorothy demanded to see her son immediately and threatened to call every news outlet in the city if he wasn't released within the hour. The desk sergeant brought Dorothy back to see David in the holding cell. The reunion was emotional and heartbreaking. Dorothy broke down in tears seeing her son behind bars, while David remained composed but clearly devastated by the day's events. The sight of an elderly woman in a hospital gown crying over her wrongfully imprisoned son was something that would haunt everyone present for years to come. Captain James Morrison, the watch commander, arrived at the station just as this scene was unfolding. Morrison had been called in from his day off after Rodriguez briefed him on the situation. He took one look at the evidence and immediately ordered David's release. But the damage was already done. Morrison called Thompson into his office for what would be the most uncomfortable conversation of Thompson's career. Morrison had reviewed the body camera footage, read the witness statements, and spoken personally with Dorothy Richardson. There was no way to spin this as anything other than a catastrophic failure of police work. Thompson tried to defend his actions by claiming he had followed proper procedures. Morrison pointed out that proper procedures would have included verifying the suspect's story before making an arrest. They would have included checking the property records to see who lived there. They would have included listening to witness statements from neighbors who vouched for David's identity. Most importantly, proper procedures would have included treating a cooperative suspect with basic human dignity rather than rushing to judgment based on racial assumptions. Morrison didn't say this last part directly, but it hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. The internal affairs investigation was launched that same evening. Thompson was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. His body camera footage was seized as evidence, along with all reports and documentation related to the arrest. The department knew they were facing a potential lawsuit that could cost them millions of dollars and destroy their reputation in the community. Word of the arrest began spreading through social media that night. Mrs. Patterson had taken photos of David in handcuffs on his own front porch, and those images quickly went viral. The story had every element needed to capture public attention. An innocent man wrongfully arrested, clear evidence of racial profiling, and a police officer too proud to admit his obvious mistake. Local news crews arrived at the Richardson house the next morning, setting up cameras and interviewing neighbors about what they had witnessed. The story led the evening news on every major station in the city. National media outlets picked it up within 48 hours, and suddenly, Officer Marcus Thompson's mistake became a symbol of everything wrong with modern policing. But this was just the beginning of Thompson's downfall. The real consequences were still to come, and they would be more severe than anyone could have imagined. The civil rights attorneys arrived within 72 hours. Rebecca Chen and Marcus Williams from the Coalition for Justice had built their careers on cases exactly like this one. They specialized in police misconduct lawsuits and had a track record of securing multi-million-dollar settlements for their clients. When they saw the body camera footage and witness statements, they knew this case was a slam dunk. David Richardson sat across from them in their downtown office, still processing what had happened to him. 3 days earlier, he had been a successful accountant, helping his mother recover from surgery. Now he was the face of a national conversation about racial profiling and police accountability. The transformation was surreal and overwhelming. Chen explained that they could pursue both civil and criminal remedies. The civil lawsuit would seek monetary damages for the violation of David's constitutional rights, false imprisonment, and emotional distress. The criminal referral would push for charges against Thompson for false arrest and potential civil rights violations. David listened carefully, weighing his options. Meanwhile, the police department was in full crisis mode. Chief Patricia Williams called an emergency meeting with the mayor, city attorney, and public relations team. They all knew the optics were terrible. A decorated police officer had arrested an innocent man in his own home, ignored multiple opportunities to verify his story, and then doubled down when presented with clear evidence of his mistake. The department's initial strategy was damage control. They released a statement saying the incident was under investigation and that they took all allegations of misconduct seriously. But this generic response only made things worse. The community wanted accountability, not bureaucratic language. Protesters began gathering outside the police station, demanding Thompson's immediate termination. Thompson hired his own attorney, a former prosecutor named Robert Daniels who specialized in defending police officers. Daniels reviewed the evidence and delivered some harsh news to his client. The case was indefensible from a legal standpoint. Every decision Thompson had made was wrong, and the documentation proved it. The only question was how severe the consequences would be. Daniels advised Thompson to consider cooperating with the internal investigation and showing genuine remorse for his actions. This might help reduce the penalties and possibly save his pension. But Thompson remained defiant, insisting he had followed proper procedures and that the whole situation was being blown out of proportion. This attitude became clear during Thompson's formal interview with internal affairs investigators. The session was recorded and would later become a key piece of evidence in multiple proceedings. Thompson showed no genuine remorse, no understanding of how his actions had harmed an innocent family, and no recognition that his behavior violated basic principles of police work. Detective Rodriguez, who had discovered Thompson's mistake, was also interviewed by Internal Affairs. She described how Thompson had ignored obvious evidence and refused to consider alternative explanations for David's presence in the house. Her testimony was damaging because it came from a fellow officer who had no personal interest in the outcome. The neighbor who had made the initial call was brought in for questioning as well. Mrs. Henderson, a 73-year-old widow, admitted that she had assumed David was up to no good because she had never seen him before and he was black. She said she felt terrible about the whole situation and wished she had simply introduced herself instead of calling the police. This admission was particularly damaging because it highlighted how implicit bias had triggered the entire chain of events. Mrs. Henderson's assumptions led to the police call, and Thompson's assumptions led to the wrongful arrest. The case became a textbook example of how unconscious prejudice could destroy lives. The body camera footage was released to the public after a court order forced the department's hand. Watching the video was excruciating. David's calm professionalism contrasted sharply with Thompson's aggressive hostility. Every reasonable explanation was dismissed. Every offer to verify the story was ignored. The footage showed a police officer determined to make an arrest, regardless of the evidence. Legal experts who analyzed the video were unanimous in their assessment. Thompson had violated David's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. He had failed to conduct a proper investigation before making an arrest. Most damning of all, he had allowed racial bias to cloud his judgment throughout the encounter. The police union initially defended Thompson, releasing a statement about the dangers officers face and the split-second decisions they must make. But as more details emerged, even union leadership began distancing themselves from his actions. The case was so clearly indefensible that supporting Thompson risked undermining their credibility in future cases. 3 weeks after the arrest, the district attorney's office announced they were filing criminal charges against Thompson. He was indicted on counts of false imprisonment, deprivation of rights under color of law, and official misconduct. These were serious felony charges that could result in significant prison time if he were convicted. The announcement sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. Police officers rarely faced criminal prosecution for actions taken in the line of duty, even when those actions were clearly wrong. The fact that a prosecutor was willing to charge Thompson signaled that this case was different, that the evidence was so overwhelming that criminal liability was unavoidable. Thompson's family life began falling apart under the pressure. His wife, Jennifer, worked as a teacher in the local school district and found herself facing awkward questions from colleagues and parents. Their 2 teenage children were bullied at school by classmates who had seen their father's arrest on social media. The family received threatening phone calls and hate mail from people across the country. The financial pressure was equally devastating. Thompson was suspended without pay pending the outcome of the criminal and administrative proceedings. Legal fees were mounting rapidly, and the family's savings were quickly depleted. Jennifer was forced to take a second job to make ends meet, while Thompson sat at home watching his career and reputation crumble. David Richardson, meanwhile, was struggling with his own challenges. The wrongful arrest had traumatized him in ways he hadn't expected. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, wondering if other police officers viewed him as a criminal. Simple tasks like driving to the grocery store became anxiety-inducing experiences. The media attention was both a blessing and a curse. While it helped expose the injustice he had suffered, it also made him a public figure, whether he wanted to be or not. Reporters called, constantly asking for interviews. Strangers recognized him on the street and either offered sympathy or made hostile comments. His quiet life as an accountant was gone forever. Dorothy Richardson was equally affected by the ordeal. The stress of seeing her son arrested in her own home had set back her recovery from surgery. She developed complications that required additional medical treatment and extended her hospital stay by 2 weeks. The family's medical bills were mounting, just as David was considering taking time off work to deal with the legal proceedings. The civil lawsuit moved forward on multiple tracks. Chen and Williams filed suit against Thompson personally, the police department, and the city. They alleged violations of David's constitutional rights, negligent training and supervision of officers, and municipal liability for maintaining policies that enabled racial profiling. The damages they sought were substantial, potentially reaching into the millions. Discovery in the civil case revealed disturbing patterns in Thompson's behavior. His personnel file showed previous complaints about racial bias that had been dismissed or downplayed by supervisors. Citizens had complained about his aggressive treatment during traffic stops, particularly involving minority drivers. The department had failed to address these warning signs until it was too late. Training records showed that Thompson had received minimal instruction on implicit bias and constitutional policing. The department's policies on investigating suspicious activity were vague and outdated. There was no clear protocol for verifying a suspect's claims before making an arrest. These systemic failures made the city vulnerable to significant liability. The criminal case against Thompson proceeded slowly through the court system. His attorney filed numerous motions challenging the charges and seeking to exclude key evidence. But the body camera footage was admissible and devastating. No legal maneuvering could explain away Thompson's refusal to verify David's story or his dismissal of witness testimony. Plea negotiations began behind closed doors. The prosecutor offered Thompson a deal that would involve pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for his resignation from the police force and agreement not to seek law enforcement employment elsewhere. Thompson initially rejected this offer, still believing he could fight the charges at trial. But as his legal bills mounted and his attorney explained the likely outcome of a jury trial, Thompson's resolve began to weaken. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and public sentiment was strongly against him. A trial would be expensive, embarrassing, and likely to result in conviction on the most serious charges. The police department's internal investigation concluded with a scathing report that recommended Thompson's immediate termination. The report found that he had violated numerous departmental policies and had brought discredit upon the entire organization. Even if he were acquitted of criminal charges, his employment with the department was effectively over. 6 months after David's arrest, Thompson finally accepted a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to official misconduct and false imprisonment in exchange for a sentence of 2 years probation and permanent forfeiture of his law enforcement certification. The deal allowed him to avoid prison time but ended his career in policing forever. The civil settlement came 3 months later. The city agreed to pay David Richardson $2.8 million to resolve all claims related to his wrongful arrest. The settlement also included agreements to reform police training, update departmental policies on investigating suspicious activity, and implement new oversight mechanisms for handling complaints about officer conduct. Thompson's life after the plea agreement was a study in consequences. He struggled to find steady employment, as background checks inevitably revealed his criminal conviction and the circumstances surrounding it. Former colleagues avoided him, unwilling to associate with someone who had brought such negative attention to their profession. The comfortable middle-class lifestyle he had built over 7 years as a police officer was gone. His marriage didn't survive the pressure. Jennifer filed for divorce 8 months after the plea agreement, citing the stress and financial hardship caused by Thompson's actions. The custody arrangement for their children was complicated by his criminal record and the notoriety of his case. He was allowed supervised visitation but struggled to explain to his kids why their family had fallen apart. The broader impact of the case extended far beyond the individuals involved. Police departments across the country began reviewing their training programs and policies on racial bias. The Richardson case became a standard example in criminal justice textbooks of how implicit bias could lead to wrongful arrests and constitutional violations. David Richardson used his settlement money to establish a foundation focused on police accountability and community relations. He became a reluctant but effective advocate for criminal justice reform, speaking at conferences and working with legislators on police oversight bills. His experience had transformed him from a private citizen into a public figure fighting for systemic change. So, there you have it. One moment of prejudice, one series of bad decisions, and lives changed forever. Officer Thompson's career ended not because of a single mistake, but because of his refusal to see the truth when it was right in front of him. David Richardson went from caring for his mother to becoming a symbol of everything wrong with policing today. Sometimes justice comes slowly. Sometimes it comes with a price tag that can't repair the damage already done. But it does come. This case was intense. But this case on the right-hand side is even more insane.
Welcome to a channel dedicated to the absolute truth. We believe in holding power to account by carefully examining the evidence. Opinions vary, but the records don't lie. Thank you so much for watching today.